BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Davie Scott here, popping into your classic Scottish albums feed with another bonus episode from BBC Radio Scotland. When we sit down with an artist to talk about their albums, we always record way more conversation than we can really use in our feature episodes. So we just like to give you the chance to hear your favourite artists raw and uncut too. This week, I'm getting up close and personal with the duo behind the 80s sensation, Strawberry Switchblade. You'll hear the conversation I had with Rose McDowall. And before that, here's my chat with Jill Bryson. Let's start off. I think the kind of start of all of this, and tell me if I'm wrong, is art school.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of your kind of aesthetic and where you came from and how you built it. So, talk about that experience for you being at art school. What did it do to you?
I don't know. It just felt like it was the right place to be for me because I'd missed some school. I'd been agoraphobic. I'd basically stayed in for a year, didn't go to school, and what do you do? Pre-internet, pre any kind of decent TV. What do you do? I just spent the year drawing and listening to music. That was, just listen to music because I was just on my own most of the time. My parents were at work, my sister was at school, I was at home, terrified to go out, and that's what I did. I drew and I listened to music, and so that kind of, went. Once I got back into sort of education, I had to do my exams, but I wanted to go to art school. That was like the sort of dream. I always did want to go anyway. Mm-hmm. My dad took me to one of the degree shows when I was, 11 or something, or 10 or 11. I thought, this is a good place to be.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
But again, I mean, as history has sort of told us, art school in the UK more generally, and certainly in Glasgow, has been such a hotbed of musicians.
It has, hasn't it? Yeah.
And I'm interested as to how far your musical ambitions or your musical leanings were developed in the time that you were there,
At
John.
art school? Well, I think it was a mixture of being at art school and having been part of the sort of punk scene in Glasgow and actually experiencing young Glasgow bands, appearing because I didn't have anything before that I could say, well, here's a Glasgow band, here's a local band, Of course there were musicians and there were bands who were from Scotland and from Glasgow, but you never saw them, particularly in Glasgow, unless they were doing it as part of their tour, to see a band arise, kind of from, just from ordinary folk and start playing, and that's kind of what punk started. So then we actually started going to see bands who we knew and people we knew and saw around, and it was great. It just made me feel like it was a possibility to make music. I mean, the whole punk thing being just learn a few chords and you're off. It's like, well, why not give it a go? You don't have to be a virtuoso, which is just as well. I just give it a go, and there was just that kind of energy and fun, and just seeing, and it got to a point where it seemed like everybody I knew was in a band,
Yeah, that DIY thing. I mean, it's funny. I often talk about Glasgow as being a kind of an example of a city whose entrepreneurism comes out not necessarily just in business, but in the way that artists and musicians work, because it was a very entrepreneurial DIY scene.
Yeah, absolutely. With the sort of with like postcard records and it's like, well, if nobody's going to release it, we'll release it ourselves with the fanzines, that kind of thing. Just everybody just doing it themselves. It might be really lo-fi. It might be like having a wee 4-track studio like the Hellfire Club, everybody used, just so you could kind of make something, make demo tapes. It just felt like it was possible, and it had never felt possible to me when I was stuck at home and like reading the music press and listening to music. It was like, for a start, there were very few women involved in music. If they were singers. They weren't musicians, they weren't writing, not many of them anyway. And so it was really hard to imagine, yourself being able to do it. So, you know, when things developed, punk happened, I thought, right, this could happen, and it should be fun, and it should be creative, and it, you know, and it kind of, yes, I think that whole art school thing lends itself to that. It's like, yeah, you can do it. Of course you can do it. Just, you know.
It's good. And the other thing, of course, about art school for you is that one of the really important parts of the Strawberry Switchblade story gets started there, and that is the aesthetic of it.
Yeah.
And that came from the textile work that you were doing, mixed media and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So where did that come from? Because that is such, I mean, to this day, and you still retain that kind of aesthetic in your work, and it's been a kind of life's work, I guess, for you, Jo. So where did it come from in the start? What that kind of look? What was feeding into it?
I think I really loved kind of 60s graphics. I used to look at all these, like, I think they were a European sort of 60s graphic magazines with all this incredible kind of photography in it, but also pop art, you know, like just kind of that kind of op art as well, you know, some stuff that it's just like it's a, you know, it's a really strong kind of visual effect, and I just loved stuff like that, and so it was just a kind of combination of that sort of weird. I think the 60s were a massive. It's weird. I was born in the beginning of the 60s. Obviously, don't really remember it. The 70s I found to be really grim, really grey and really grim. So I looked back to the 60s and at the colour and the art, and you know, everything about it was just kind of the complete, you know, opposite of the 70s, which was, you know, people with flared jeans walking along in the rain, and with the rain soaking up their jeans, you know. I could tell how wet it was by how far the rain came up the jeans.
Oh God,
know?
that is
You're younger than me, so you might not remember.
No, I do. That's it. That's what I'm saying. It's so vivid.
With the short Glaswegians, you know, with like too long trousers soaking up the, you know, it was just like, and you just that was it was just really dull and grey and kind of, you know, just couldn't. I just felt.
So it's a kind of reaction to that.
It was a reaction to that, and it was looking back to the 60s. I love 60s music as well, like pop music and people like Love and Velvet Underground, and you know, just something from a different era, you know, which is it's a bit sad, and that's why when punk happened, it was like, right, okay, I can be part of this. But instead of looking back at things that I can't ever experience and you know, firsthand, I can get this is an experience you can create yourself, you know, and you can get involved with.
So this is where you and Rose kind of meet, and she gets involved in sort of wearing your clothes and some of the accounts from you, I have to say, you talk about the way that she maybe kind of pushed you to do things in a way that she was really different from me. She was like a real outgoing person, like completely outgoing. I'm not outgoing. I'm really shy. I was agoraphobic. I don't, you know, so I didn't socialise much. I'm really self-conscious and stuff. I am, and I'm not confident. And she was incredibly confident. You know, she was just like, everybody knew her, and you know, she was like a character on the scene. You know, she was, you know, really strong character. People really liked her, and we just got to know each other through other, you know, everybody in that sort of area. We didn't know each other well because she had a baby very young and was kind of off the scene for a while. But when she came back, she was really keen to kind of get involved and do stuff. And she was in a band with her husband playing drums. And, you know, so there was always that as well. So we were just always talking about like, we should have a band, we should do something. And then other people would encourage us. So what were the first bits of music you did with Rose?
The first, well, I mean, the two of us got together and we thought we need to have a band. So we got another couple of girls, Carol McGowan and Janice Goodlett, bass player and drummer, and we decided that we'd book a gig. So we booked a gig, and then we thought we'd better write some songs because we haven't got any songs. So that was that really stupid thing. So we wrote 6 songs. I think the first one I wrote was Trees and Flowers. And so I'd written that one myself and thought, right, well, we just got to get on and do something. So I wrote Trees and Flowers, and then we wrote another few songs. Rose wrote the lyrics. So I kind of strummed it. We got the melody. She did the lyrics. But so I, apart from Trees and Flowers, and there's a couple of tracks on the album that I wrote the lyrics for, she generally did the lyrics.
So that's an interesting one, because I'm always interested in what the collaborative process is. But I think just to kind of go ahead a couple of years, when Since Yesterday came out, it was so kind of fully formed and so kind of shiny, and I mean that in a great way. And if you listen just to a year or 2 years before that, it's quite a bit more primitive. So what do you think? What do you think were the things that really made the difference, for better or worse? What was it that made the difference in changing the music?
I suppose going from a 4-piece to a 2-piece. If we'd carried on as a 4-piece, we'd have developed as a, the musically we would have developed, because obviously we were all quite rudimentary, and we'd have learned together. So that would have, I think, had us going in a specific direction. We didn't do that, and because of that, it was then deemed that we would need help to make, we're not a band. So that sort of set us on a path where we had for a while a band, and we played a few gigs, and that it was interesting when we rehearsed, and we, but it just didn't work. It didn't work like it did, and that's what led us to the record label. And obviously, when you've got a big record label involved, that's they're very persuasive, and they wanted us to be with a producer then who, if the band thing wasn't going to work, then we went with a producer who was going to produce the backing track, basically, from what we were doing. So we would record our bits, and we'd be in there with them, and he'd say, what about this and this? And that's how that came about. Which was a really good experience, because we got on with him, and I liked what he did, even though it was totally different. I really enjoyed doing it because he was just kind of coming up with all this stuff, and kind of atmospheric, obviously very electronic, but it was the 80s, And
although it does, Jill, have a thing about it, and it's something that I think is such an important part of this record, and an important part of the kind of the sonic aesthetic, if you like, of that record. It does have that big orchestral thing about it as well. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the songwriting as well, and how those songs develop, because they seem so built for that treatment. Is that something you were aware of when you were writing the songs?
No, no. I was just the only thing I was aware of was like getting a tune out.
So give us an example of it. So I mean, I've got a number of songs that I'd love to speak about on the record. Maybe we'll start by speaking about Trees and Flowers, actually. And first, maybe just tell us the story of that song, how you wrote it, and where it came from.
Well, it was, the chords. So I started off with the chords, and funnily enough, I think I bought a songbook of old 60s songs, loving, but some of them, when you buy a book to play, on guitar, and it had guitar tabs on it, so that I used to get chords from that and little chord progressions, and I would look at them and go, that's quite nice. And so I would find a couple of chords that I liked, or if, that I liked together, and I would play them, and then I'd start to sing along, to get a melody, just kind of ba-baing, or talk just gibberish. And then I had to the lyrics I just found very, very difficult. So, but I don't know why I thought about Trees and Flowers. I just thought it's like a kind of poetic way of saying that you hate going out. And I thought, well, that's something I know about, and I wanted to talk about it. It's like, what do you know about it? Well, I don't do much. So that's one thing I do, is I have panic attacks. I can't go out, and so I was just trying to get that across. But
so you hate the trees and you hate the flowers.
I don't hate trees and flowers.
No. I know you don't, but it's such a great moment. It's a great moment.
I hate the buildings. It's like I don't want to be. When you're out, and everything's awful. It doesn't matter if it's beautiful. It doesn't matter if it's interesting. It doesn't matter, if you're standing in front of the Macintosh building at the art school, although you wouldn't be now, but
No.
or in front of them. You don't want to be there. So, there's nothing that you're going to get from that except fear.
And that the contrast of that, the darkness of that message with these beautiful 60s kind of major seventh chords and the melody is one of the things that lives it. And I think it's beautifully realised with that flute, or is it an oboe at the start of that?
It's an oboe,
It's really beautiful.
That was a Nicky Holland who did it was such a beautiful arrangement. I like to listen to just the arrangement and this French horn and oboe. It's just lovely.
It's beautifully done, but it's also, I think, that writing style is kind of the blueprint for that whole record for me.
Yeah.
And when I listen again, I do hear that it's a real songwriter record in that sense. Mm-hmm. It's got that, well, it is for me. And is that so that approach of using those kind of 60s chords and all that. So were you consciously doing that for the rest of the record when you start working on it?
It's kind of, I thought it works. This works. I like how it's sounding, and so I start, just getting a few chords to, and we'd, I'd come up with something, and then we'd go into, we'd rehearse, we'd get together, and we'd sort of, bulk it up a bit. Rose would write the lyrics, or she would, she'd take a recording back with the melody, and she would write the lyrics, and we'd come back and forth. So but that's how it kind of started, and that's how it carried on, and when she started writing music as well, so she was learning to play guitar, and she kind of carried on like that because she liked that kind of that aesthetic as well. That was something that was, it worked. I think she's always done that. I don't know, but
I think to this day, Rose's music, she still does. Yeah, she's still got that.
She's still got that kind of aesthetic. So, it worked. It just worked for us. And I remember singing, like the pair of us sitting singing, California Dreaming and stuff like that. Just like anything that was, just.
Can I? Please God, let me hear that.
I don't think we've got a recorder. We used to just. I remember.
I do.
Well, I know that there is for years. Stephen Pastel has been talking about releasing, the album, but all the kind of stuff that didn't get released. But there definitely isn't one of that.
God,
unfortunately,
I'd love to hear, and it does make sense. Or maybe there's a bunch of songs that I wouldn't mind kind of touching on, and we can maybe get back onto, but just picking up on Trees and Flowers. I wondered if the song 10 James Orr Street was a little bit of a thematic update of that.
Well, that was that was Rose. Rose wrote those lyrics, and that was about a house that she stayed in. But it's definitely got a kind of similar, similar feel to it. And she wrote that about kind of being forced out, having to leave a place, not wanting to. I think it was a council place. Council say, "Get out, we're moving you to," was that sort of real Glasgow thing of like they're just going to knock everything down and move you, and it's like, well, we don't want to move. So it was that sort of being displaced kind of song, But so I wrote the tune for that. She wrote the lyrics, so I think it was a kind of.
And it does that thing, doesn't it, of that Strawberry Switchblade thing of taking that almost like a kind of kitchen sink story, and dressing it up like a Truffaut movie or something with this kind of, this kind of musical colour of it is really strong, and it's a beautiful song. And of course the other one, I think, clearly the big sort of ticket number in terms of the hit was Since Yesterday, and again we have that beautiful French horn intro. I think the Sibelius quote, it's just beautifully done. Tell us about that, because it has kind of become iconic, and it does stand up. You think, well, that's great. That's a great record. Tell us about the making of Since Yesterday. How did that come about? What was what are your memories of doing it?
Making that, I mean, the song itself kind of changed dramatically from the beginning. It was very different, lyrically totally different, musically, melodically slightly different, and it really only changed. The sort of bulk of it was the same, just the verse changed. Rose rewrote the verse melodically and really, I think, made it way better. It just came together. It was kind of a little bit rinky dink before that, and when that, I think the producer had said go away and rethink that just to see if we can kind of, and she kind of came up with this, and it was like, well, that's great, and the lyrics great. So it came together like that. It always had sort of potential to be good. But then when that happened, I just thought, yeah, and it worked okay. Just singing it with an acoustic guitar, just the two of us singing it worked like that. And I think, to take it on from that was the producer who took it on from that and sort of built around it. And it just all came together. It was.
So the layers on it are beautiful, and there's a remix I think you can find here or there, which I think the first part of the remix is just a kind of some of the backing track, and you can hear the detail of it.
Yeah.
Was that a lengthy process? Were you there for most of that? Or,
we were always there. Yeah, it was the making of the album was great fun because, it was. He was quite young as a producer, and he'd worked as an engineer, and I think he'd worked at Air Studios, and so he wanted to experience lots of different studios. And so he said, do you fancy kind of doing a week here and a week there, and we'll see how it, which we did, and which I thought was fantastic. So you didn't kind of get bored, you had to get in and settle in, and he was really comfortable having engineered places, and he had his engineer that he just took around with him, and it was just brilliant. It was great fun, and we got to see a lot of London and outside London. I think we went to one studio outside London, but yeah, we got to kind of explore, and not knowing London at all, we got to explore it through the studios, and
Having made records myself in London during that time period, I'm also aware that you could literally spend 4 hours in a studio programming a bass drum, and that could sort of slightly kind of strangle the experience.
Yeah.
But what I hear on Since Yesterday is fresh ideas, kind of fresh as the morning milk almost.
It didn't feel as if we were, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like, oh, for goodness sake, you're just going to, he was very much like, do this. And if we needed extra musicians, he'd get them in, and, that kind of thing. And it was all, so, he was very organised with it. And we were always there, we were always talking, and it was a good experience. It wasn't like, oh my goodness, it was great. We went to different studios. It was always something new happening. It was really exciting. That's what I remember. It was a great experience. One
of the things you started to talk about there, which I think is such a distinctive part of the sound, is the vocal blend between you and Rose. And it is, when you go back to the album, it's such a big stamp on the sound. Rose, very distinctive lead singer, but the combination of you two together, I think, is something. Tell us about that blend, about that vocal blend, how it worked, how you developed it through the.
Well, very basically, just while we were saying, things like when we'd be listening to the Mamas and Papas and stuff like that, and I mean we don't come close. I mean, the harmonies are just. I listen back sometimes like, why didn't they suggest some more kind of interesting harmonies? They just let me kind of bleat on, but they didn't. Nobody ever did. They just let us do it. So it must have sounded okay. It was just about that. We just loved that. We liked that, the kind of music that we liked, harmonies.
I'm surprised to hear you say that because to me it's one of the things that's really distinctive about the music. I think vocal harmonies, and also it's the way that you go from the unison.
Yeah.
Then to these kind of beautiful harmonies, and there's real sense of texture about it for me, Jill.
Thank you. I suppose it's just not what when I've spoken to people before with that who who would do harmonies, I think that they're just kind of a little bit like, well, it's not really harmonies, is it? Because you're singing along and then you're going up, and then it's like, well, that's just how it happened. And I'm not trained, and we're not trained singers or anything. Never sang in a choir, or just you're just doing what comes naturally and what you think sounds okay, and that's really all. That's really all we were doing. So yeah, if it works, it's I'm glad.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I love the vocal sound on the last track, Being Cold, and I think that Being Cold's a beautiful song. It's got this, I think, again, it's got those kind of 60s chord progressions. Yeah. Tell me a wee bit about that one.
Well, that was another agoraphobic song, because that was about travelling from Glasgow to London constantly. And I hated travelling. And every time I travelled, it would be, will I get on the train? Will I not? Because there were times when I didn't get on. In fact, I think we were going down to meet, when we signed a publishing deal, I couldn't get on the train to go and meet the publisher. So I just couldn't do it. So my boyfriend at the time went with Rose and her husband. The three of them went. I stayed at home, and I was like, that is, oh God. Anyway, so it was just that constant. I really found it so difficult. It's boring as well, but it's difficult, and that was trying to get across that kind of feeling. And it's the reason we moved to London in the end, just because I thought it's going to be better to be there than to be constantly coming back and having to leave again. Because I found that just awful, and I didn't want to leave. I never wanted to live in London, and I ended up staying there for 30 odd years.
And the music is so full of melancholy, and that's it's soaked in it.
Yeah.
The melody, but the harmony that underpins it, it's just it's really sad.
Yeah.
in a beautiful way. It's but manages to be uplifting as well. And there's a funny line in there as well where you talk about while we were laughing, we passed from one land to the next. Which a lovely line, which also seems to sum up that kind of transience.
Yeah, because you're just like, you're going from we're not in Scotland anymore. We're I don't know. Yeah, just the whole thing about backwards and forwards and being displaced. Being displaced is a big thing for me. I like being at home. I like to have, everything around me, and I'm not a traveller. I'm not an adventurer, and so I forced myself to do it, but it was really challenging. So I guess that was a way of kind of exercising it.
Where do you think the moments of collaboration between you and Rose? Where do you think the strongest of those moments are on the album?
I would say harmonies, really. I think that's kind of something we did together. And the songs, whether I wrote them or whether she wrote them or whether we wrote them together, we never wrote them it was like, I'll do the melody, you do there was that kind of, separation. But when we were singing together, it was, that was like something was coming together, and we were doing something together. And when we would rehearse, and do stuff together, we'd bring each other ideas and melodies, and then we would get together and we would sing them together. And that's the thing that made them, a joint project. It kind of sort of drew us together. So, saying that. So even if it was just us singing along together, we just always did it. We'd sing along, kind of, and we'd try out some harmonies. And
it is a distinctive sound. Yeah. One thing that I forgot to ask you about on 10. So 10 James Orr Street, that you've got a really heavy duty arranger on that, Andrew Poppy. And you got another one, David Bedford, yes, who came up in another conversation last. I mean, really amazing. But on the outro of James Orr Street, 10 James, you've got this brass thing. Tell us about that, because it's an amazing thing.
I know, isn't it? It's just like, I remember just like getting shivers up my back when he was doing it. I was like, this is incredible,
So did he come in and he orchestrated? Did he then conduct a number of different players? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I don't. Oh gosh, now you're really going. I more remember the David Bedford one, because we had an orchestra. So he done the arrangement and got the orchestra in and did it. But it was incredible. I mean, absolutely. I just thought, this is unbelievable. And it was just, it happened. It was the one thing, because obviously the 10 James Orr thing was a smaller group of musicians. So this was, I remember it just because it was so, such a huge, the strings. Wonderful. And I remember he was desperately trying to get me not to play my melodica. He's going, it's just not working, Jill. It's just not working. And I was going, yeah, I like the the difference. It's that kind of. And he was like, oh, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure about it. I really don't. Too bad. It's going in.
So that's on Being Cold.
That's
right?
on Being Cold. Yes, the melodica.
It's great. So he didn't make you sit in another room.
I did sit in another room. Yeah, I wasn't sitting like, right, everybody, just wait until I get my melodica tuned. Not. No, I did that. But it had already been recorded, and he was just going, oh, I couldn't. Oh, why? But I do love listening to it. I mean, just listening to the strings. Oh my goodness, what a joy!
And again, I mean, I was talking earlier on about that there was that particular period of the mid-80s where groups like the Pale Fountains, yourselves, were using, that level of orchestration.
Yeah.
There was that kind of ambition in the music, and it's there strongly in Strawberry Switchblade, and of course, in your case, it resulted in at least one big hit record, and you had other singles that did well also, and a really quite an impact for that record. So what was the experience like going from your Hellfire Club demos to being on Top of the Pops and touring in Japan and all the rest of it?
Yeah.
Because it was the album was a big success.
Yes, and it was it was a quite contrast, shall we say. And it seemed to happen very quickly, although we did do a few demos with down near Liverpool in the Wirral, which I really loved. With a guy called David Hughes, and I really loved them. It was Go Away he did, and just very, very simple. So it was just him and us, and just that sort of keyboard, and I don't know, it's just something, I loved that, and I would have happily done the whole album like that, really kind of a bit more lo-fi. I think we did it in like an 8-track studio. I think it was in his house, actually. And I loved that. So that was a kind of, something straddling the two. And then we had some time working with the band, which was then again sort of trying to work through a sound, trying to work out a sound, and that didn't really work out at all. Although we did do some gigs, and it was great having, playing as a band again. But yeah, by the time we got to recording the album with David Motion, it felt right. That felt like the right thing to do. And it was very different from the Hellfire Club, obviously. But just a different experience,
And again, I suppose one of the things I'm trying to get to here is that you find yourself on Top of the Pops doing, Since Yesterday.
Yeah,
basically,
totally
even in terms of the aesthetic of it, you're channeling what you were doing at Glasgow School of Art, in your mixed media programme 2 or 3 years before that. So that's quite a compressed timescale, and that must have quite an impact on you personally.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of carried on. It was like when I said, look, I can't finish the last year of my degree. It's just too much. And he was going, no, well, that's part of your degree. That is creation. That's you being creative. Put your magazine articles, your music press articles, any photographs, all that sort of stuff. Put it all in your sketchbooks, and that's part of your work. You can't. It's not. You're not going to give up because of that. Just do it. We've got proper talking to anyway, and So it was wonderful to see it. Kind of surreal. I remember we had to stop on the road to watch. I was terrified at Top of the Pops, just because it was that. It's hard to know now, isn't it? It's hard for people to understand. That was the only thing that you could see where you might see your favourite band. It was like practically the only thing on TV, especially prime time, that you would ever see a band that you liked. And some of my best memories are seeing people on Top of the Pops that, they're just etched into my mind. So being part of it was kind of, just mind-boggling. And we had to stop and watch it in a bar on the road because we were going somewhere, we were travelling somewhere. And I remember just standing in this bar watching the TV. Just crazy,
It's
really
amazing.
kind of mad sort of experience,
One thing I slightly wondered, and don't take the hump. I sort of wonder if you think that. I think that the subsequent two singles, I love them, right? Let Her Go and Who Knows What Love Is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that maybe the slightly more obviously arty songs might have charted better?
Yeah, I was really, really against having Let Her Go as a second single. Absolutely didn't want it to be the second single. Just didn't. Not that I didn't like it. I really liked it, but no, I thought it should have been something more, something darker, because I don't know, I just thought it was too obvious. It just didn't seem right to me. It didn't feel right to me. I knew Since Yesterday was the right song to release first, but I wouldn't have chosen Let Her Go for sure.
What would you have chosen?
I quite like Secrets, which is weird because it's quite poppy, and I love that kind of, there's a kind of a area of vocals that kind of rise, to sort of in the middle, and it just kind of breaks off, and there's other sort of angelic vocals, and I just
that
love
kind of
that
percussion going back.
Yeah, and I just thought, in terms of for them wanting something that was slightly more upbeat, then I would have chosen that. But yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't have chosen Let Her Go.
It would have been Being Cold for me, probably,
Yeah.
and maybe even the second song on the record as well, which is a bit more kind of, another Deep Water, not Deep Water, yeah, Deep Water. That's which has got a slightly more gothic sort of edge to it.
Definitely, yeah.
But in a way, you just wonder if, again, coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Totally, yeah. The record company, no way would they have gone for either of those. But I would have, if it was up to us, we would have gone for, yes, definitely one of those two. I thought, well, if you're going to have to go for something really kind of poppy, I would have done Secrets, but, it wasn't up for discussion.
So anyway, for the avoidance of doubt, I love those two singles as well. But it's something that it's funny. Just over the last couple of weeks, just revisiting this record, I thought, there was other things, and I think I think it would have been a lot. Well, I mean, like Being Cold, just the sort of arrangement on it, it's so kind of. There's something quite overwhelming about it. It's just, I love it. And Deep Water, that's great. Just that's got a real kind of chilling sort of feel to it. But. So we're calling this a classic Scottish album, which it definitely is. Where do you think Strawberry Switchblade sit in terms of? I know that sometimes artists can be a wee bit reluctant to talk about that, but it is an important record in Scottish music. Where do you think it sits? Does it sit with the indie thing? Does it sit with the pop?
I think it sits in the middle somewhere. I mean, it's not an indie album, is it? I think Trees and Flowers is the most sort of indie kind of track, but the general thing is, yes, it's a pop record made by indie girls.
There's your tagline for the programme, I'd say.
That's what it is.
and one very last one, I promise. Do you love it?
Yeah, I do actually. I still love it. Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes if I'm listening to the radio when I'm working, I listen to the radio and Since Yesterday will come on, and it's just like, oh, let's just crank it up and go. That's all right,
Magic.
So I think that I don't think this how awful, isn't that a dread? But no, I love it. So.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I think we kicked off talking with Jill was just about the kind of different backgrounds that you two came from, and obviously she came from the sort of art school scene, and we'll maybe talk about that a wee bit because you intersect there as well. But you already, didn't you, by the time you met Jill, had a sort of into music, and you were thinking about music. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I was in a band called The Poems, and actually they both, long before Switchblade, but they both ran consecutively at a time where I would get gigs. I'd organise gigs. I was the one that did that. And it'd be Strawberry Switchblade and The Poems playing, which was kind of cool for me because I get paid twice. But yeah, I was into music. I mean, to be honest, my dad was my biggest musical influence because he had a brilliant record collection, and you just wake up in the morning, my dad would be singing while he's shaving and didn't cut himself. But my dad was just like so into music. He was into all the 50s and 60s stuff. And I grew up listening to music non-stop, singing non-stop. You know, my first instrument was a set of drums. And I played to the Kinks with my window wide open, you know, the whole street. The local DJ in the street used to borrow my records, which was kind of funny. I found he was having parties, but my dad was my biggest influence. Of course, there were bands that I liked, but he instilled that melody into my head from a very young age. I love melody.
Well, I think that makes me happy to hear that, because I think one of the things that people often focus on with Strawberry Switchblade is
the image.
Well, the image is one thing, but also I think that there's something about the kind of I suppose the production of it, but actually at the heart of it, when you go back and listen to that record, it's a great songwriting album for me, and I think it's got all of that kind of. And it's funny, the 60s thing is something that comes through so strongly. So what else was in your record collection, Rose, that you were listening to?
Well, I would listen to a lot, mostly, predominantly 60s stuff, but then I did have all my dad's albums, which was Buddy Holly, Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, a whole selection of things that my dad liked that were all very melodic, Mamas and Papas, Simon Garfunkel, you know, loads of stuff like that. I was exposed to that when I was just a little kid. So my dad taught me to jive when I was 18 months old. So music's always been in my life. I think when punk happened, that actually, honestly, it was like the gates of freedom opening, and anything was possible. I never was going to be what everybody expected anyway. I was always, you know, the odd one out. So I was kind of lost when I was 16, and I was like, I can't be that person everybody wants me to be. It's just not me. And when punk happened, it seriously was like the gates of hell opening and just letting you out. And basically, I always was quite a strong individual, as in, you know, I want something, I go for that sort of thing. I wouldn't say I was ambitious, but I knew what I liked, and I wanted to be me, in spite of most people in Glasgow wanting me not to be me. I was a bit of a target, but I really didn't care because I didn't want to be like them. So it just kind of gave me the freedom to. I was a little tiny kid. I used to write letters to the manager, like people write letters to Santa. And I'd put letters to the manager in post boxes because I wanted to be a singer when I was really young. And it was like, I thought, do we get to the manager, that magic person that makes things happen?
Oh, so you mean just like the manager?
Yeah, the manager. I'd put, like people put to Santa. I'd put the post box to the manager, and like I'd write him a letter. God knows where those letters are. There'll
be somewhere, Rose. There's an art project in that somebody's collected those the manager letters. But what I think, you know, one of the things, because you say that thing about the way that punk opened up possibilities for people. And I think sometimes a lot of people talk about how their own musical ability or the primitive musical ability was empowered by that. Is that something that you experienced? Where were you musically? Were you able to play guitar at that point, or?
I could sing. I could sing. I didn't play any instruments. I bought a 12-string guitar, an acoustic echo from somebody locally for 40 quid. And I taught myself to play guitar on that. But when I was in my first band, the Poems, with my first husband, Drew McDowall, who's actually still a musician now, doing pretty well. I mean, him and I, like, the first instrument I had was drums, and I could sing. So I would practice along to the Kinks, because they were quite good to practice drums to, not too taxing. And I was kind of more of a Maureen Tucker kind of drummer anyway than I don't know.
Yeah,
than a rock drummer.
And in a way that cuts right to it, doesn't it, Rose? Because that sort of intersection between sort of, you know, classic 60s pop music and punk is nowhere stronger than it is in the music of the Velvet Underground. So
Absolutely.
So you're listening to Mo Tucker, you're getting that sort of primitive thing, and believe me, we'll get onto Strawberry Switchblade in a minute, right? But I'm just interested in this stuff. You talked about the Poems. I have to say, tell me something about the Poems, because I've not heard the music. Tell me about what that music sounded like.
It was pretty experimental, to be honest. It wasn't pop music by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't thrashy punk either. I mean, I played drums like tribal drumming, really, more percussive. And we had a guitarist, and we had violinist, and sometimes a sax, but that never happened live, really. And I would sometimes sing from behind the drums as well, but Drew was the front man, and he wrote the lyrics and stuff. He wasn't a singer, but he was a performer.
A vocalist.
Yes. He won't mind me saying that, because he'd say it himself.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, you know, some of our greatest singers are not really singers, aren't they? I mean, it's true.
Well, absolutely. I mean, even if you listen to Lou Reed, he's not always hitting that note, but it's his voice. It's got something. And for me, you can have a perfect singer that, you know, will do everything that they're trained to do, but that doesn't make, for me, a great singer. For me, a great singer is someone who is not just joining the dots, but is touching you, that can actually sing something that someone will absorb, and it has meaning, you know. And they don't have to be a perfect singer to do that. I mean, a lot of the people I like are not exactly perfect singers.
Yeah,
but that's not it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think let's move on a wee bit to, and we'll come back to that whole thing about singing, because I'm interested in your own lead vocal that we hear so beautifully on the Strawberry Switchblade record, and we'll come on to Strawberry Switchblade in a minute. But just one of the things we spoke about with Jill last week was this kind of moment where she's at art school, she's doing her mixed media stuff, and that's when you two kind of meet. And one of the things that she said that I thought was really interesting to me was she talked about the extent to which you pushed her to sort of go further with her own art and her own ideas. Is that something that you were aware that you were doing, or is that just you? Is it, you know, just to kind of push people? What was the relationship like at the very start?
Well, I'm a total empath, you know, and like when we got together, I knew that Jill had agoraphobia. I knew that I was going to, but I wasn't thinking music business-wise. I was thinking I'm doing something I love, and if other people like it, that's a bonus. Because my art teacher was trying to get me to stay on at school and go to art college, and he'd write me a letter of introduction if I didn't go, and Jill and Peter were saying, just take your portfolio. But that was not, I loved drawing and painting, but singing was my passion. And I think, like, when we got together, it was actually Jill's boyfriend that I knew before I knew Jill. And and then when Jill and I met, we just had such a good laugh together, and we were sitting like James King.
Oh, yeah.
Wrong one again. James Kirk.
James
Kirk from Orange Juice gave me the name Strawberry Switchblade, because the Poems were doing a gig with Orange Juice at the Glasgow College of Technology, and we kind of did our own sets, but then we kind of joined forces. So there was half of orange juice, half of the poems, doing stuff. And so James was coming out to my house to practice and stuff. So then he said, he was doing a fanzine. He said, I'm not going to do it anymore. He was getting fed up with it. It was called Strawberry Switchblade. I went, you cannot, you have to do it. That name is so amazing. And he said, and eventually through the conversation, he said, have it. I went, have the name. So basically, the name came before the band, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I had the name. I decided I was going to use this for a band. And Jill and Peter were around our house, and she was just saying, who's in the band? And I went, well, I don't know yet. And she said, can I? And I went, yeah, what do you want to play? It was really that was our really raw beginnings, you know, and she didn't play anything either. So, but her dad had a guitar at home. So she started learning guitar, and we really did it from scratch. And we did egg each other on. You know, there's nothing better than two people working together and just building that enthusiasm, bouncing off each other and just, you know, driving each other. We were brilliant at that, and we had the greatest fun. We really had a good time.
I love that, Rose, and I love the story about Strawberry Switchblade and the name of that. And it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes I think as an artist, when you hear something like that, Strawberry Switchblade, I always talk to people about the song Strawberry Fields Forever. If you came up with the title Strawberry Fields Forever, it's almost impossible to write a bad song. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's such a beautiful thing. And Strawberry Switchblade, okay, so that lit up for you. What was it about the sound? What did the sound of that thing, what was the sound in your head when you heard it?
It was my head. It basically was my head. It was the strawberry and the switchblade, which is completely my personality anyway. So it just made sense. Do you know what I mean? It's that juxtaposition. It just made sense to me. But it sounded great as well. It looked good written down. I didn't see any negatives about that at all. I just thought it sounded amazing. And it couldn't just go never be used.
Yeah, I totally get that. I think we're not going to spend ages of time talking about the look. We already spoke about it, but let's just touch on it, because I think what's interesting to me is that idea of that. You hearing that Strawberry Switchblade as what is your head or in your head, and almost at the same time that kind of that look is beginning to build up, partly through the work that Jill's doing at art school, and I mean, even if you look at there's some really interesting photographs came up recently from one of our earlier shows, and that Strawberry Switchblade kind of image and that look seems to cohere so beautifully. You must have been aware of that yourself at the time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was dressing like that when I was in the poems before Strawberry Switchblade anyway, but the two of us together evolved it a wee bit more, you know, and also, I mean, there was just me, then there was me and Jill, then there was a 4-piece, then there was back to me and Jill again. And that was on the premise that if we get busy, you're going to have to give up your jobs. But Jill could stay on at art school, and she was prepared to leave if she needed to. But it was kind of a joint effort getting her through her degree. So, I mean, I lent her a load of my Spanish collection of cards and Spanish flamenco dancers and stuff, and all my fans that I had. And so we kind of pulled together to get her through the art show. And then I'm in part of some of the photographs that you might have seen,
they're
where
beautiful.
She used the polka dot sort of box that turns black. So I was in the polka dot cat suit, but underneath wearing a black one. So the box unfolds and turns inside out, and it becomes from polka dot to black, as did I. So it was, you don't really see that in the photographs and the stills. In fact, I've not even saw one with me in the whole black thing, but it was like we kind of really supported each other a lot. And I knew she was agoraphobic, but so I knew there would be struggles ahead. But really, I was doing it for the love of music and the love of what we were doing. and not really because I wanted to be famous.
Let's move on to the music. Of course we are focusing this whole thing on the Strawberry Switchblade album, but I sort of figure that, you know, that there's that lovely Japanese edition, and it's got that version of Trees and Flowers on it as well, which also appears on the kind of 4-track demo thing that you did, I guess, in the Hellfire Club or something.
Yeah.
And what I really want to get to is the first bits of music that you did together. What were those, and where were the moments where you thought this is quite an interesting sound that's happening?
Well, in my house in Darnley, of all places, Jill would come out there, and I had the reel-to-reel, and so we did some demos on that, and we wrote there, or Jill would come to my house with a bit of something, and we would finish it. Usually it was done there because we didn't have money for studios and stuff like that. So a lot of the writing, Jill would do some things at her house and bring them to my house, and then we'd work on them with bits that I'd worked on. So it kind of came together that way. It was very much in the beginning, very much both of us writing most of the stuff together. And occasionally one of us writing a whole piece, but eventually it kind of got where we were more fragmented and bringing our own stuff to it and not working so much together, which I think I really like it when you can bounce off each other with ideas and stuff, because you grow more musically. So it was really kind of, we always added something to whatever the other person did anyway, so it was a joint effort.
Give me a specific example of one of the early things where you think the collaboration was really working strongly.
Well, I think songs like Go Away and Little River and Journey from Home, and, you know, like, I can't think of any of all of those. You know, when we recorded that album, we only had that amount of songs. We didn't have a set when we had our first gig. We had to write songs for the gig because we only had 3, and we got away with having 8. So, I mean, we were basically writing on the go. So when we came to do the album, it was like we did 2 Peel we did 1 Peel session and Kid Jensen session, and seriously, we had 8 songs. So we decided the 4 that were good for Peel and the 4 that were good for Jensen, and then the album sort of coming up, and we obviously changed the songs a little. I mean, Trees and Flowers was not Trees and Flowers. Since Yesterday, it was originally called Dance, and it had different lyrics. But we worked on that a bit before we released it on the album. But yeah, those early days, just working on the harmonies was just like, honestly, you could have hardly anything, but when you start building those melodies, it just turns into something. It's like a blooming flower, you know. When we came together, we just bloomed, and our voices were really good together. So
and actually it's one of the things that I had in my sort of when I first made the list of things that I wanted to speak to you and Jill about. And it's something actually I don't think you hear people talking about when they talk about Strawberry Switchblade. I think the vocal blend is one of those kind of more unique things about your band. And I mean, again, you know, it's such a great sound. And actually, we'll come back to talk about it a bit more specifically. But let's talk about the blend that you got on the version of Trees and Flowers, for example, that you ended up making. What was the process of that? Those beautiful major 7th harmonies that you do and all that.
Are you talking about on the album or the demos?
The album version that you ended up doing. I love the demos too, but the album version with those gorgeous harmonies.
Well, the harmonies, you can if you like, from my perspective, if I'm writing a song and I'm singing along, I can hear the harmonies. Do you know what I mean? I can hear the harmonies when I'm playing, and I can't speak for Jill, but how she does it, but how she felt about it. But we our voices sat really nice, had a nice timbre together. So they sat really well together. And obviously I was doing the lead vocal and Jill was doing harmonies, but our voices suited that. It was, she did a couple of lead vocals on stuff, but mostly I don't know, it just kind of came together and just worked really well without much effort. We never struggled with things. We never struggled with harmonies. We never struggled with where this is going to go, or it was a natural, like, it was just really organic.
Let's begin. We'll start going through a couple of songs. You mentioned Since Yesterday, and obviously it's one that has stood up so strongly, and I think could fairly be described as a classic record. Tell me about you said that a different title at the start. Tell me about writing that song, Rose, and what it was that you brought in from your own experience to the song itself.
I never told anybody this because it was very common for bands to be very political in the 80s, and I really didn't want to go down that road. I didn't want politics in the band sort of thing. So, not that I was ignorant to politics, I knew it was going on, but so I never told anyone what Since Yesterday was about. It was basically about nuclear holocaust, because we were living through the sort of Cold War era. And I had a baby at the time, a small child, and to be in fear of a nuclear war when you have a baby it's gut-wrenching. So Since Yesterday, it was really about that, about what you would have left, Everything's gone now since yesterday because, it would have been. And so it was quite a dark song, and quite a lot of the lyrics are quite sad. But I quite like to make lyrics a bit ominous, so it's not obvious what they're about. So I tend to sort of I like pictorial lyrics. I like lyrics that actually people see things when they're listening. I like that kind of thing. I like to create images in people's heads when they're listening to the music. And I think that lyrically, I've kind of managed to do that, which is quite good. But a lot of the songs in Switchblade were about all the ones that I wrote the lyrics to, which was most of them, but they were all about my childhood. They were all about growing up in Glasgow. They were like 10 James Orr Street, for example.
The next one on my list.
that one still touches me really deeply because it was a real place that I lived, just up the hill from the necropolis, where they kind of knocked it down to extend the Royal Infirmary. And I was at my happiest when I lived there before we moved into not a very nice area.
It's a beautiful song, Rose, and I think it's got that. I actually wondered, sort of going back to if there were maybe some of the same themes, and I know that maybe Jill was the lead writer on something like Trees and Flowers, for example, but with James Orr Street, I just wondered if that was your sort of Trees and Flowers in a way. You're talking about some of the same things, maybe. Yeah. I guess that's what it was. I think that's why we worked really well, because we were writing about what we knew about and what we really felt about, and that transposed itself to the audience in a positive way, even if it didn't come from a positive experience. So, and lots of people have not very positive experiences. So there is a world out there for people that like the melancholy. And I don't think people celebrate melancholy as much as they should, because it is somewhere we all go sometimes. And I think, I write in that melancholy world. But melancholy can be beautiful, and it can be comforting. And sweet as well. And all, for me anyway, all the way through this record, you've got this kind of underpinning sort of melancholic, sense of I guess some kind of northern sound about it or something, but it's really sweet as well. And all the way through the record, I think you're using vocal harmonies you're using, arrangements as well to lift that. Is that something you were aware of?
Yeah, I guess so, but it became more. I mean, realistically, like when we did the sessions, we sounded way more guitar-y. When we did the album, David Motion came in, and it was very electronic, and we had real reservations about that in the beginning because we were a guitar band basically, but once we'd finished the album, I actually think those songs were taken to another step, another place with David Motion's sort of contribution to it. And for a while it was a bit, don't know if I felt like I was being untrue to myself, but I love the album and I love what became of it. And the great thing is that the demos, as rough as they are, still show where that album came from. And it's good that they've been released. It's good that like Stephen Pastel's going to be releasing some old sessions and stuff that we did. That's still to come. So it's kind of good seeing the really naive, primitive form of writing sort of growing. And it doesn't really, it doesn't change the songs. It changed the sound of the songs, but it doesn't change them because David Motion was quite sympathetic to what we were doing. He wanted to do that album.
Maybe in a way, Rose, again, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, I don't mean to. Maybe he and people like Andrew Poppy and David Bedford, who contribute the arrangements and all that, actually just identify the ambition in the writing. Because if something like James Orstreet, I mean, that beautiful kind of big outro brass arrangement that you hear, it kind of just does the song service, and it's
great. I love what happened to it, and doing all that build crescendoing harmonies and stuff. It was exactly what I wanted to do.
It cuts as well to a really interesting part of the story for me, which is that if you look at the kind of timeline of it, from where you started making music to doing these kind of rough demos to when the Strawberry Switchblade record came out, it's incredibly condensed in the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the level of sophistication in the music and I think your performances is kind of, it's a huge trajectory. Was that just hard work? Or was it just the meeting of the minds?
It was both, I think, because when my daughter went to school, when we moved to London, she'd go to school and I'd have all my equipment set up and I'd basically work like I had the 9 to 5, but I'd just work until it was time to go pick her up from school and I'd have a lunch break. And I was really quite methodical when I was in London and also to start off with in Glasgow. But then there was you have to remember when at the creation of something, there's a much louder bang at the creation than there is when it continues on. So in the beginning, we were really, really driven, not for the reasons that some people might have been. It was just because we just wanted to create and we just loved what we were doing. And then when we moved on to work with other people, we were really lucky to work with people that were sensitive to the emotions in the songs, and whether it went electronic or not, it in a sense it helped us express even more because there was so much more outside of what we could do that other people could do, and each to their job. You have to know that you can't do everything, and people can come in and spark new ideas, but always having creative control. I was very, very much like, you're not going to change. I was quite determined in who I was and the compromises I was not going to make, which eventually probably came to the end of Strawberry Switchblade. But it's just like Warner Brothers, we want you to dress down a bit, we want you to do this, we want you to, this is what you got, this is what you signed, this is what you get. I'm not gonna water down my pit. I can't. I've always been who I am.
And the song,
it's hard.
And the songs, sorry, Rose, but the songs are you know, at their heart so strong that you know that was never, I guess, going to be in question. One of the other songs I wanted to speak to you about was Deep Water, which is I think it's the second track on the record.
Yeah.
It strikes me as something that's maybe got echoes of some of the later music that you've made.
Yeah.
And there's a slightly kind of dark, almost kind of like gothic edge to some of it,
Yeah.
and the but the harmonic approach, the kind of melody writing in that is not the kind of approach that you would expect.
It's not a typical pop song, is it?
No, thank you. You said it
Well,
much better than I could.
Well, the thing is, I love things that are discordant. I really love it. If you get things that are, you know, discordant, sitting in the right place with each other, it can just sound amazing. I mean, one tiny little slip and it sounds awful. But if you just get it so that it's like a drone, you know, you can make a drone like bees would make a drone, lots of individual bees. But I like to do that with the music and the vocal, and I like reedy instruments because they go really well with vocals. And, you know, it's like when I'm writing something, my voice is an instrument, and I write parts for other instruments vocally, and even instruments I can't play, you know, but I've got that piece there. Yeah. I mean, Deep Water was actually about a dream I had when I was a kid. It was a recurring dream, and it was basically I was walking through a graveyard in Birkenhairwood behind me. Strangely, I'd run away from them into a graveyard. Don't ask me why I did that. But anyway, they were coming up on me, and I jumped into the river that was in the graveyard, and I was breathing through some grass, like you see in the movies. And this boy came up to me and took my hand just when Birkenhair were hanging over just above me, and he was blue, and he took me down to the Mare Kingdom, where I met the Mare King, and so from a very scary dream to a very pleasant dream. And it was basically that's what not since yesterday Deep Water's about. But musically, and vocally, I love that almost not right, but you've managed to get it right. The discordant stuff, and it's like Black Taxi as well, which came a lot later. That song was written kind of like that as well. It's like I quite like droney things that you can add. That you can create a lot of things over it, a lot of harmonies and a lot of melody, but it's got a bass line, so to speak, that kind of holds it and earths it, and to me gives it power, gives it that thing you can sit on and do everything else. And I remember we were in the studio once, and I'm sure James Kirk will forgive me for saying this, because he gave me the name after all, but we were doing Another Day, and there was a chord change, and he said, no, you can't use that chord change. And I went, why? And he said, that's not the way music goes. And I just thought, well, it sounds good, so for me, that's the way music goes. And it was like, you know, I never kind of played by the rules, because I never I did go and have a couple of lessons, but I could never get into joining the dots. I'm too impulsive, and I'm too I want it now sort of thing. I don't want to learn like so many months of theory before I pick up and do a chord. You know, I just buy myself a guitar case chord book, and teach myself the chords, and then I can write a song instantly. Because
and maybe that leads to more unusual ideas.
Well, exactly, because I know people that are great pianists, but if you swipe that paper away from them, they can't play the piano. They need the dots, and that's great for them. But for me, I'm kind of the opposite. I know the theory of music, but I've never been patient enough to be fast enough so that I could read it. I just pick up the guitar. It's time to write a song, you know.
and just go for it. Another song I wanted to speak about is Being Cold, which is I think the last track on the record. which is, I think it's a beautiful song, beautiful melody, amazing imagery.
Yeah, I love it.
And you've got that really memorable thing. Jill spoke about it really beautifully as well last week, talked about that sense of passing from one land to the next, and she talked about having to stay behind and because of her agoraphobia. And it just seemed to me to be a song that had so much of your own stories wrapped up in it. And there's a lot of it. I think you used the word empathy earlier on. There's a lot of empathy in the song, and just talk us through what you were saying in that song.
Well, predominantly Jill wrote the majority of that song.
Okay.
So she, it is a beautiful song, and I wrote some of the lyrics and I wrote some of the melodic bits, but it was predominantly Jill that wrote that. I think it's hard to talk for lyrically about a song that Jill has written mostly. I just think it's a beautiful song, and it kind of was quite tragic when, I'd have to go down to London to talk to the record companies on my own because Jill couldn't, because she'd had an agoraphobic attack and she just could not get on the train. So sometimes Peter, her boyfriend, it became a thing that Peter and I would do it and he would speak for her. And that was quite sad, but it also led to not so nice things as well. I mean, I was always aware of the fact that Jill had agoraphobia and that was always considered in the equation, but there were so many things that we couldn't do. That's what I bought into. And I knew it, and I supported Jill all the time, and I tried my best to try and, give her courage and help her to do it. And we laughed a lot. And
I tell you, one thing that you've really opened the door there for us to speak about, I think, is you cannot talk about the Strawberry Switchblade album without talking about the success that it brought. I remember myself being in London, I guess 1985 or something like that, early 1985, and Since Yesterday being on Top of the Pops or something, and just being like, wow, that's such an amazing thing to see a group from Glasgow that are just so kind of doing such a unique thing musically and the aesthetic of it as well. What was that like to end up on Top of the Pops and then actually touring Japan and all of that kind of stuff? Well, what was the experience?
I'll tell you what, when we did our first Top of the Pops, I mean, you have to remember we were really quite young at the time, and I was probably younger in years mentally, not in a bad sense, but, in an innocent sense. I was quite innocent on one hand, but on the other hand, I was really strong and bold. So, and I think, when everything happened so fast for Strawberry Switchblade, I mean, we had David Jensen and John Peel fighting to get our first session. And basically, John Peel phoned me up personally. And so he booked the first session. But David Jensen's session went on just 2 days before Peel's, although we'd done Peel's first. But it was Who Wants to Discover This Band? And it was so for us, it was kind of like a big whirlwind of chaos. But it was positive. I mean, it was positive, but you have to remember when that kind of thing happens, there are things that slip by that you don't know that's going on because it's all about delegation, because you can't do everything yourself when you're at that level. So there obviously were compromises, but holding on to who we were was really, really quite hard. And it was I think we were just so busy and so exhausted that. And then when we did have to fight with people, it was just so awful, a fight about what we want to put forward. But it was brilliant as well. I mean, it's driving around. And for me, it was kind of it was a bit surreal. Because I grew up in a really, really, after I left 10 James Orr Street, which was in Townhead in Glasgow, I moved up to Balornock, just round the corner from the infamous Red Road Flats, and it was a hellish place to live. Gangs, being attacked, it was a war zone, honestly, and it was very dangerous to be there. So that kind of, for a little kid who was quite innocent, and that was a really hard time for me, because it was also the time when my little brother was murdered, and he was only 10 and I was 11 at the time. So it was a very dark time for me. And I remember at school, the careers officer came round and asked everybody in the class what they wanted to do. And they all said, nurse, he's working the shipyards, they were still around then, things like that. And I just said, I want to be a brain surgeon or a pop star. And the whole class wee-weed themselves laughing. And they just totally, like, hysterical laughter in the classroom. And I was sat in my seat and I don't care. You know, and I really meant, I probably was more thinking psychology than brain surgery, to be honest, because I'm interested in the mind. But when I was on Top of the Pops, I was thinking about my parents, obviously, but I was thinking about my granny the most, how proud she would be. But a flashing thought went through my head when I was standing there, like when we were performing on Top of the Pops, like, I wonder if they're laughing now. And and it wasn't a nasty thing, like I'll show you. It wasn't like that. It was just like a recollection of that time, just kept passing through my mind and going away again. But I think it's quite funny that people will laugh at people who say they want to do things that are kind of off the beaten track, if you know what I mean. Absolutely. I mean, and it's like, especially in impoverished Glasgow, it's like, nobody has expectations. No, a lot of people don't have dreams even. I had somebody say to me they have no imagination. I thought, that's like one of the best gifts a human being can have, or a person can have, is their imagination. How can you say you have none? It is everything. And I don't think I would have lasted this long if I didn't have an imagination. And I'm not talking about musically, I'm talking about life at all.
Just you know, the way of coping with the world, the way of interacting with the world. Just two more questions from me, Rose, and then I'll let you go. Thanks so much for taking so much time. The first one is there any aspect of this album or any of the songs that I've not mentioned to you that you think are important that we should talk about?
God, I've just gone a bit blank now.
That almost certainly means that we've not missed anything. So we'll just go on to my last question, if that's okay. Which is, we're calling this a classic Scottish album, okay? Which it definitely is. But can you see it as a Scottish album? Is there anything Scottish about it? Where does Strawberry Switchblade fit in Scottish music culture?
Honestly, growing up listening to the music that we listen to, I mean, both Jill and I, a lot of bands grew up in Scotland listened to that, like from country to all sorts of things. It is a very Scottish album because the experiences and the songs are quite a lot of them are very unique to having grown up in Scotland and having had those experiences that you then project onto the music or the lyrics. You know, it's the whole mood, the whole essence came from two Scottish people, so it's got to be Scottish. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and I totally agree with you. It is a classic Scottish album. Thank you so much for taking the time. I love your music.
Thank you.
Look after yourself. Hope that's given you a bit more insight into the creative power behind the utterly beautiful Strawberry Switchblade. If you're enjoying our classic Scottish albums feed, please spread the word, and if you can, leave us a review and rate the podcast on your app. And we'd also love to hear who else you'd like us to feature on the show. You'll find us on BBC Radio Scotland's social media feeds. Just search for Classic Scottish Albums. I'm Davie Scott. Thanks for listening.